Kum Lenin Ablak Gemara. We are up to Daf Ayin Hey Amid Aleph. And we are up to here the two dots. Okay. And so the last thing we learned about was a person made a conditional that he doesn't want his wife to be a person who makes all these vows. Turned out to be that she was, and we said it was a mistake. But if he did it without making any preconditions, then obviously he divorces her. He can't live with her, but we learned also he doesn't get a ksura, but this time he needed a divorce. Okay. Then we said all the women that disqualify a kohen from doing the service of the Beis Hamikdash disqualify women as well. Now, the list of women that disqualify kohanim is Masechta Becheres. We also have a list of women that disqualify animals from being brought up as a carbon. So anything which disqualifies a kohen disqualifies a woman. The question is, are there more women by women that don't necessarily apply to a kohen or not? There's exactly the same. Says the Gemara, Kol Mumin Shapois, the ton we learned, I see for Alay, and there are a few additional women by a woman that a husband has a right to say, look, I cannot tolerate it, even though those kind of women does not disqualify a kohen from serving in a Beis Hamikdash. So, for example, Zeya, sweat, or Shuma, let's say a mole, or the Chapeh, bad odor coming from the mouth. Those are things that by a kohen they can serve in the Beis Hamikdash, but for a woman, a husband can say, look, I cannot take this. Now, bit odd that the Re'eh Chapeh, he didn't notice till now, because remember, if he noticed before they got married and it didn't bother him, he can't come along afterwards and say, oh, it bothers me. You knew about it, and you obviously were prepared to accept it. Why should she lose a ksuva? So somehow or another, when it comes to odor, he didn't notice it before because she probably masked it. But now, they're living together all the time, can't mask it all the time. Remember having Mara Shabbos, a woman could walk around with peppercorns in their mouth because they used to use that to quash or to eliminate their bad breath, or anybody's bad breath, male or female. So Gemara says, first of all, Gemara, please, you tell me these three things don't passel by a zayah, for example, sweat doesn't passel by a kohen. But now we learned hazakin, an old man who's a kohen, or hachayla if he's infirm, or hamazuyin, which basically means all full of wet, sweat, perspiration, and all that, and all that. But now we learned mumin elo, these mumin, including mezuzim, and right now we think mezuzim and reich peh basically and zayah basically the same. So mumin elo, these mumin they're talking about an animal, and the person is l'chayda of mezuzim, a description of an animal is the same by a person when we say zayah. And mumin elu, these mumin ben queen ben ivri, whether they're temporary, whether they're permanent, psulim bottom also disqualified by a person. One of them is mezuyim by an animal. Mezuyim is the same. So is he by a kohen also? Sweat is a psul. What are you telling me that this is something by a woman that doesn't apply to a kohen? It's not a problem. There's two kinds of perspirations. Kan bezeya iveris. Here we're talking about a perspiration or a sweat that comes and goes, and kan bezeya she'ena iveris, that hangs around for a while. So if it hangs around, it's a disqualification. If it comes and goes for a kohen, it's not a disqualification, but for a relationship, it can be. Rav Ashi says a different answer. Zeya amazuri karambas. You think zeya, which is basically sweat, is the same as mezuyim? Hasam gabe kohenim. When it comes to kohenim, the efshel avra b'kiyo the chamra. Now, why? It's very easy to remove sweat. You take wine vinegar or sour wine, and acidy wine, and you smear over yourself, or somehow or another, it completely removes it. And at least it'll prevent it from happening while you're doing that later. Afterwards, it doesn't matter. So, and also a kohen, remember, a kohen only works a few hours a day. So kohen, short term, can control it. Not only can work a few hours a day, he only works one week every 24 weeks, and within that week he only works one day on Shabbos. So therefore, he can control these things. For example, he puts in these peppercorns in his mouth, and he can do his work. And the perspiration, he can go ahead and put in this wine vinegar. When it comes to women, it's impossible. You live with her all the time. So you can't eliminate the derech all the time, and nor can you remove the sweat all the time. So it's a mum for her, and not a mum for him. And this has nothing to do with mezuyim, which is something you cannot control. Says the Gemara, Hi Shuma, this mole, what are we talking about? You have mole that have hair sprouting from it, and you have mole that don't. Edie's beside the hair sprouting from it, hocha apostle, then it's possible by a kohen as well, because it's not becoming to certain as a mikdash having that displayed. Either les basar, you're working for Hashem. Either basar no hair, just a mole. So again, depends. If it's a large mole, okay, hocha apostle again, it is qualified kohen just as well as a woman. And ishum tanahi hocha le doesn't apostle. The tanya be learned. Shuma. When it comes to these moles, yesh basar, if there's hair in there, hadez a mum. Ain basar, there's no hair there. Gedoil, if it's large, hadez a mum. Tana ain't a mum. The ezel gedoil, what's considered a large mole? Peter says, "Bag, I can isa talking like Italian isa. It's like a 5-cent coin." So the Amr Rabbi Yasi Brachanina, Rabbi Yachin said, we're talking about a mole, but I made it al patchas. The mole is there's no hair. It's small, but it's on her forehead. So it doesn't, by coin, it's all right, but by in a relationship, it's not all right. Petchasa, I understand, if it's on the forehead, it's right there, it's so visible, and he knew about it before he got engaged to her. How can he come after with a tiny, I can't tolerate this. But you knew about it, and you were Michael. The law of the fires you saw, and it didn't bother you. Papa said, you know what's wrong about? She has it on the forehead, but every time they met, she was wearing a hat, and therefore was right underneath the hat. Occasionally they see it, occasionally they don't see it. Interesting. The Gemara could have said very simple. We said before, according to one opinion, in your house, you don't have to wear your head covered at all. But out on the street, you have to wear you have to wear it. So why could the Gemara just say that it's underneath? You don't have to say zimnin mischazin. Just say that in the house when she takes her cover off, it's very visible. So he didn't know that because he never, before they got engaged, it didn't happen. And remember, in those days, even there were many people who, even before they were engaged, they used to wear a cover. In fact, the Rambam holds that any girl over 12 years old has to wear her head covered. Not a question of getting married. We actually have a mission in Durham about that. That's in our case. Some places women used to wear covers, some places didn't wear covers, as we'll see. Anyway, sitting more further. I heard this from a great man, let's say a dog had bit her, now became all red and everything else, and it's quite visible that wound. It's considered a mum. And he can say, I can't take that because it's permanent scarring and I can't take it. Permanent blemish. Omar Chiza said, this is hard to understand. If a woman has a very husky voice, it's a mum, and it's grounds to say, look, I can't live with her, and therefore she forfeits the divorce. Remember, it says in Pasuk, the woman, we want to describe a woman has a very sweet voice. He looks beautiful. And this woman doesn't have a sweet voice. It's very difficult to understand. You would have heard that before you got married. Obviously, it didn't bother you. How can you come along now and say it bothers you? Unless you can have to say somehow or another she was able to disguise her voice, or she didn't talk much, and she made sure that whenever she talked, she made her voice sound shriller than it was. And you didn't hear that huskiness. And now, at home, he hears it all the time. I mean, I don't know if that's possible, but that's the only way to explain the Gemara. Tony Rabnos and Beira talking about defects by a woman that a person can say, look, I didn't know before we got engaged, but now I can't take it, and therefore it's grounds for divorce without a ksuva, for example. If there's a gap between the two breasts of a woman, the size of a tefach, it's considered a defect. Before we said a defect, he just made a cryptic statement that this is the space, the gap between two breasts. So Rav, the son of Rav, said before Ravashi, the tefach l'mal yusuf. That means that he thought and was trying to say that's a good thing. Ravashi, gabi mumen tanya. This is actually no, this is a defect. The kama. So what should it be? What's ideal? Ideally, it should be 3 fingers. Tanya, the gap between the two. It's amazing. I'm sitting here discussing the anatomy of a woman. Tanya, if one is larger than the other, if one of her breasts are larger than the other one, it's a mum. How much larger? So the Maisha, the son of the grandson of Shmuel Levi, said in the name of his grandfather Shmuel Levi, tefach. If one is a tefach larger than the other, says he, is that even possible? Well, yes. I once saw this Arab woman. I once saw this Arab woman. that was able, that one of her breasts she was able to put behind her neck, behind her shoulder. The Hinikas was able to nurse her son sitting behind her. So in other words, it's much larger than the other one. It's possible, and that's a mum. The pasuk says, because when Ramesh said something, the name of his grandfather, we bring another thing. Or Ramesh said something before the name of grandfather, so now he says something, he's on his own. Said the pasuk, you will say ish v'ish, a person and a person. Who is the second person? See a minute. Yulabo, with born there. Who you will establish him above. Amar Maishav, who this ish v'ish? Amar Maishav, Rebbe Shimon Levi. Echad hanoiled bo, whether you're born in Yerushalayim, the echad hametzapel l'roisa, and or whether what seen could be the whole Eretz Yisrael. Or whether you were born there, or whether you're anticipating to be there, and which is talking about Asad Lovim when Mashiach will come. And the pasuk there says that all the goyim will bring you a present, and they'll bring all the Yidden from all over the world and bring it to it. So even though you weren't born there, but you brought there. The Chad Minayu, one Israeli, if seen as Israeli is Israeli or Yishlaim is Yishlaim, is Odif. They're equal to two of us. No, they're much sharper and smarter than we are. The Gemara says all these stories about these Yerushalmi kids who were precocious and extremely astute. Amar Rava says, Rava, true, they are smarter than us. But the Chad Minon, one of us, Kisalik Lassam goes up there. If one of us ever makes it to Eretz Yisrael, we're better than them. We're equal to double. And how do I know that? The famous Rabbi Yirmiyah, who asked a number of questions, he would needle the Amoraim and ask these questions that eventually, more of Abbas in the beginning, they threw him out. The end of Abbas, they brought him back in, but the beginning threw him out because he asked such questions. You say 50 amas one way, 50 beyond 50 amas another thing. What about if one leg is in this side of 50 amas of a chicken and the other leg is the other side? How do we, all these kind of questions? He would really needle them. So Rabbi Yirmiyah, when he was above the Lahaviyoda, my Karban, he was very ordinary, he was very plain. He couldn't understand what the Chachamim was saying. But Kisalak Lahasan, when he came to Yisrael, Korilan, what he said up, he described us, he would say, Bavloi Tipshoy. He would say, Hani Bavloi, these foolish Bavloi. Suddenly no Israeli called us that, but when he went to Israel, he called us that, which means that he now became twice as smart as an Israeli because he started out in Babel, gave him the grounding. When he comes to Israel and Navida di Basa, the ear in Israel makes somebody smart. So they have the double advantage. So I think about it further. Mishnah. So now this is very important. It's two parts of this Mishnah. What happened was that you got married and they discovered there were mumin there. So it depends. They were going to engage. Now, if these mumin were there before even they got engaged, and he just wasn't aware of it, he'll say it's a mekartas, it's ground for the entire marriage to unravel. But if these mumin came about after they got engaged, she says to him, well, your field got flooded, like we had in getting more Kesuvos. You feel the stach for today, your field got flooded, your tough luck. When we got engaged, everything was perfect. So it's your tough luck. Now, the question is, and the difference is that if he still can't live with you, he has to divorce her and give her a Kesuvos. If he, but if it happened before, then there's no kedushin. Then there's obviously no kedushin whatsoever. Now, so the Mishnah says like this: it depends what stage this occurred. If she found that there were mumin there, and the oida base of here, she's still in her father's house, she hasn't moved in yet to her husband's house, and now the husband wants a divorce and everything else, and he claims it happened before and the whole marriage dissolved, and she says no, happened afterwards. So according to Taisus, it's like a bari v'shema. And according to one opinion, Taisus, that's part of the issue. Part of the issue here. She says definitely it happened before. He doesn't know if it happened before or not. So he's just saying maybe it happened before. She's saying it definitely happened after we got engaged, and he's saying maybe it happened before. How do I know? So anyhow, so if it happened in the parents' house, and she now says, "I want my Kesuvos." Because you don't want to get married, fine. Give me a divorce and give you my Kesuvos. So tzaddik l'havaraya, she'll have to, the onus of proof, the burden of proof is on her. And she has to prove it that it happened after getting engaged. When his field got flooded, it's his tough luck. But the onus of proof is on her. Now, why is the onus of proof on her in this case? She is the Moitzi B'Chaveri. She wants to take money from him, as we're going to see in the Gemara, because, and we'll soon see why. Why the onus proves on her. No, that's it. We don't believe her. We believe the husband that happened before. You prove otherwise. However, let me say, why do we don't believe her? We'll see soon. Even though she has a cheskes guf. Cheskes guf means that the chazaka is every person is born without blemishes, and if there is a blemish, it happened much later on. So the chazaka the guf says that the blemishes, it must have happened after he got engaged. Nevertheless, because you want to take money from him, he has a cheskes mammon, the money sitting by him, you need to bring conclusive evidence. This is not conclusive evidence. That's how the Mishnah starts off. But then the Mishnah says, but if contrast that with Nichel about, once she went into her husband's house and she moved into there, then, and now the husband says, look, you had these women, I believe was there before, let's dissolve the whole marriage, and she says, no, what happened now? Who has to prove what? The husband now has to prove these women occurred before they got engaged, and therefore the mechat is dissolved. Otherwise, he has to pay her out. In other words, we believe her. If we believe her, the reason is because what does she have going for her? She has a cheskes aguf, maybe a bari as well, but a cheskes aguf that says that these women happened later in her life. And cheskes aguf is stronger than his cheskes mammon, the fact that the money is still sitting in his bank account. So we have a contradiction between the Reish and the Sefer, because we cannot see a difference if she's in her father's house or she's in her husband's house. But in the first case, we don't believe her. Though the cheskes aguf is not stronger than cheskes mammon. The fact that the money is by him, that's conclusive evidence. That's his, and you have to prove otherwise. And the Sefer says no, that cheskes mammon is not stronger than cheskes. We believe her, and it's a problem, as the Gemara will discuss. The Chacham will go further, and they said, when do we say that the husband can come up with this claim and say, hey, this would have been around before, the woman should have said it, they were discreet women, he couldn't have known prior. Our woman should go, the woman that was visible on her face, everything else. You can't say, look, I wasn't aware of it, and so on and so forth. You saw it, and if you saw it, you went and you proceeded with the marriage, obviously you could put up with it. And now you change your mind, fine, you can divorce it. Everybody can divorce anybody, but you have to pay her out. But the im yesh merchet b'isir, if there's a bathhouse in the city, we don't believe for a minute that you didn't get your cousin, your sister to tell you, when you're in the bathhouse next time you encounter my future kala, tell me what you see. Tell me if you see any major movement that I should be aware of. Im yesh merchet b'isir, af mumin shebesefer, even discreet woman, any yochelit, and you cannot claim I didn't know. Who definitely you would have done your homework. People do their homework before they decide to get married to somebody. Says the Gemara, okay, now we have a contradiction in the Mishnah, and we're going to try to resolve it 3 different ways. It seems in the first part that we don't believe the father at all. We believe only the husband in the first part of his father's house. She has to prove, and the father has to prove that the moment happened afterwards. Otherwise, they don't get a ksuva. We believe the husband that happened before they got engaged. Time in myself and I only because he brought a proof. The father, holy myself and I brought no proof about them, and the husband will be believed. Mani, who says that you believe the husband because he has a cheskes mammon? Contrast that with a woman who only has a cheskes aguf, a chazaka that says that any deformities would have happened much later on in her life. She was born that way. Mani, who is that? Rabbi Shui. That's the voice of Rabbi Shui we had in the first page. The Amar Rabbi Shui, he says, we don't believe it. We don't believe it, and therefore, it says Mishra Stani and Nasti. There's a debate when she was no longer a psula. It happened after she got engaged, before she got engaged. Going to be sure, we don't believe her at all. He has a cheskes mammon. You need to prove that you're still entitled to the ksuba. No, Ema Sefer. Look at the next case. What happened? She moved into her husband's house. We believe her, not him. In other words, why do we believe her? Because she has a cheskes aguf. About the proof. Time in the Ma'aseh Barai only if you meet proof. Halay Ma'aseh Barai is being a proof of Mehemen. Also, that falls on the said we believe her because she has a cheskes aguf. The Amar man she's believed. What's going on here? So Amar Abelazar says you're right. Tavra, we break the Mishnah apart. Misha Shanazu, Loi Shanazu. The Mishnah is written by 2 different authors. The first case, the Mishnah is written by one author, and according to that case, it makes no difference if she's in her father's house, she's in her husband's house. According to the first case, we never believe her, we always believe him. That's Rabbi Yeshua, because it's cheskes mammon is dominant. And the second case, again, makes no difference if it's in her father's house or in the husband's house. We believe her because cheskes guf is supersedes cheskes mammon. That's Rabbi Lazar's answer. Comes along Rav and says, no, I believe that, as we'll see later, he's going to say that the entire Mishnah is one opinion. Says the Gemara, Omar Rav says, Rav, First of all, I want you to know, he says, like Tema, don't think for a minute that Rabbi Yeshua does not believe in Cheskes Haguf. Don't think that the word is he doesn't believe Cheskes Haguf. Not at all. Rabbi Yeshua definitely believes Cheskes Haguf is a valid chazaka, that there was a change that happened much later on. And if there's another chazaka facing Cheskes Haguf is a very strong, compelling chazaka, and we would follow the Cheskes Haguf. Here is Cheskes Mammon. And Rabbi Yeshua is of the opinion that Cheskes Mammon is stronger than Cheskes Haguf. The Acharonim, Shmeitzer, his brother Kuntres Asveikis, and then many other later on have this whole discussion: is Cheskes Mammon a logical chazaka or a halachic thing? In other words, the fact that the money is in my pocket, that proves that therefore it's considered, is in possession 9/10 of the law. Is that a logical thing? Because it's in my pocket, therefore must be that I'm saying the truth. Or the law is, look, we want to make sure that you're not a ganef, the other person's not a ganef. So before we take money out in an active way, we got to have compelling evidence. Not because the fact that it's by you proves in any way that it's yours, just that we don't know what to do. So you leave things the way they are. It's a halachic thing rather than a logical thing. And they want to argue that, and so I want to say that that's the argument whether Cheskes Mammon is stronger than Cheskes Haguf or not. If Cheskes Haguf is a logical thing, and maybe Cheskes Mammon is not a logical thing, and therefore Cheskes Mammon is stronger than Cheskes Haguf, because the halacha says that logic is not good enough. We need much more compelling evidence than logic, and therefore it doesn't work. And that's what Rabbi Yeshua says Cheskes Mammon is stronger. And the other, and the Rabbi Gamliel says no, Cheskes Mammon is logic, just like Cheskes Haguf, and in the levels, there are levels of logic, and Cheskes Haguf is much stronger. Cheskes Mammon, just because the money by you is not such compelling logic, therefore it didn't. Her mum happened later. I mean, why should that have any bearing when she got her woman? And Cheskes Haguf, there's a stronger logic, and that's why Rabbi Gamliel follows Cheskes Haguf. So that's one way of explaining it. He says, don't think that Rabbi Yeshua completely ignores Cheskes Haguf. Of course, he believes it's a logical thing. He just believes that Cheskes Mammon is stronger. When Cheskes Haguf faces over Cheskes Mammon, we follow Cheskes Haguf. Like Tema, Rabbi Yeshua loves with the Cheskes Haguf a cloud. Ella. When doesn't he follow Cheskes Haguf? Where there's a Cheskes Mammon opposing it. But there's no Chazak opposing it. Surely he follows Chazak Haguf. It's a logical thing that if there were any deformities or any changes in a person that happen as late as possible. Only when you realize it. Before then, we'll assume that everything was constant, and the way you were in the beginning, that's how you continue until we know for sure a change occurred. How do I know that? The Tanya we learned, and what Kesuvos explains the Gemara other Rishonim. You were found to be tummy. And then from a leprosy in one part of your body. But then on another part of your body, we know the rules as follows. We learned there's beheres, there's different shades of white. So the rule is as follows, is halacha. Im beheres koidem l'sar lavan. If the beheres formed on your skin, that kind of leprosy, that kind of color, before the white hairs came out, then tummy. Then you are considered a leper and you are tummy. But im sar lavan koidem beheres, and the white hairs sprouted before the skin became white, then tar you are tar. And we learn that from a pasuk. So now what happens, Suffolk? You don't know which one was first. Now you were tummy till now. You haven't yet come out of your first tumor of leprosy. You will come out soon. You're like for 7 days and all that. It's reducing in size. You got to wait till the end of 7 days. But while you were tummy for another reason, suddenly this happened. So now there's a Suffolk. What do? The Tanna Kama says, well, tummy. We'll say you're tummy. Why will we say you are tummy? Because you already have your cheskes tumah, your tummy till now anyway. Something else happened now. We don't know if you're tummy or not. Well, we'll say you're tummy. Comes along, Rabbi Yeshua says keya. What kind of word is keya? My keya. Amarabba keya toyer. It's getting lighter and lighter. In other words, you are toyer. So what is he saying here? So Rabbi says that what we're saying here that you are toyer. And why are you toyer? Why are you toyer? Because we have a cheskes haguf. Till now, you didn't have this leprosy. Suddenly, there was a change, and we don't know what the change was, a tamadic way or a toidic way. So the cheskes haguf says you were toyer till now. This part of this region of your body did not have a problem with leprosy. So we're going to say what? You still don't have a problem with leprosy. So what is it based on? The cheskes haguf. And who's the author? Rabbi Yeshua. So we see Rabbi Yeshua also agrees with the principle of cheskes haguf. It's only when it opposes cheskes mammon. Okay. Comes on now, Robin says, let's go back to the original question of our Mishnah. So they both respect Cheskes Haguf, except that Rabbi Yeshua holds Cheskes Mammon is stronger. So now comes along Robin and says, I'll tell you, the author of our Mishnah is Rabbi Gamliel. Now, what that we always believe her. But there's a difference if she's in her father's house or she is in her husband's house. And that is, we introduce another principle. What's that principle? Which contradicts the Cheskes Haguf. And that is the principle of Ka Nimtza, Kan hayu. If you find something right now, we don't know when it happened, so we're going to assume it was always there. So you have two opposing principles. Cheskel the Guf says that it says there's a change. The change will happen as late as possible. Kan nimtzo, kan hayu tells you that if you find something right now, even though it's a change, if you see it right now, probably it was always there. So kan nimtzo, kan hayu tells you that if in the father's house we find a mum by her, probably the mum was there for years. In other words, probably the mum was there before she got engaged in the father's house, because that's what we're focusing on, in the father's house. So therefore, they have to prove that no, it happened after they got engaged. But Sefer, Sefer Nami, but in the Sefer, where is she now? In her husband's house. So you don't go back to the father's house. We only go back to the earliest stage of the husband's house. But she went to the husband's house with pashtus after she got engaged. So therefore, okay, you found movement by her now. So when did these movement come? Cheskeluf says the latest possible. Kanim Tekanoy says, let's go back to when? Go back to the first moment she walked into the husband's house. But that was after her engagement. So therefore, because the first moment she walked into the husband's house after an engagement, it's still after an engagement. The husband is saying it happened before. Let the husband prove that. So that's the difference in the ratio, let's say, for being the husband's house or the father's house. Comes along, Abaye not only challenges his rebbes, he also challenges his friends. Abaye comes along, Abaye and says, follow me, I have a problem with your logic. Because the Mishnah said, let's look at the Mishnah. The Mishnah says, Nikol Shusabal, she entered the reshus of her husband. Habal Sarich Lahavi Raya. She entered, and then we have this dispute, this debate about the woman. So the husband says it happened before we got engaged, so the whole thing was dissolved. So we say the husband has to prove when that happened. Habal Sarich Lahavi Raya. What does he have to prove? Sha'ad Shaloi Tisodes Hayiba Mumin Elu. He has to prove that it happened before they got engaged, and if he can prove it happened before they got engaged, then what? Then the whole thing is dissolved. It seems clear from here. Ad shaloitis aris in only before they got engaged, but meshetis aris. Let's say he brings proof that it happened after he got engaged, but let's say he brings proof that two witnesses saw that. Let's say you bring proof. The husband says that we saw this after you're engaged, after getting in the father's house. Is life that wouldn't be good enough, right? Now, according to you, we can so even though they only saw the woman in her father's house after they got engaged, but using that principle, once you know that she had women after they got engaged, then let's assume that these women were there before she got engaged, because it's still in her father's house. So according to your logic of even if we brought proof that they saw the woman after they got engaged, all they need to bring proof according to you is not it happened before it got engaged, that they saw the woman in her father's house. And the moment you can prove they saw the woman in her father's house, let's then use the principle kanim shekanhoya, was probably always there. And therefore the marriage is dissolved. Why? Lema kanim shekanhoya? That's what Bai asked a brilliant question. Omalei, so Rabbi says, not such a brilliant question, because I'm going to introduce another rule, a logical principle, and that is Amalei mission is arsa. If they prove that it happened after they got engaged, even though you want to use the principle of, so we have Cheskel said it happened afterwards, they saw it after they got engaged, you want to use the principle of kaninza kanhaya, right? To say that it happened before. But I have a contrary principle to that, and that is as what? As follows. Because we can say if the woman were in her house, which means you want to say it probably was always there, because kanim zekanhaya. We have a principle that says chazaka. We have a rule: ain adam shoyse because you don't begin drinking from a cup elegant boike before you check it out. In other words, if surely the husband would have checked her out, like we said in the Mishnah on top, in Merchas in the city, surely would have checked her out. And if there were women before, then he would have known about it, and he still proceeded with the marriage. And obviously, he said, "I don't care about these women," and now he changed his mind. Then you cannot dissolve the marriage. No, even though kanim zekanhaya, but Chazaka, there's a Chazaka tells us that Ein Adam Shoyse because Elin Boike, he would have checked it out, and therefore he must have accepted it. The Hayrav and the Vayisun accepted it. That's why he has to bring proof that they saw the woman before they got engaged. Because if you saw the woman before they got engaged, and so on. So the Gemara asks a very simple question. So what does it help if you saw the woman before got engaged? But we'll use the Chazaka that says, okay, you knew the woman before you got engaged, and you must have accepted it. Because Chazaka that a person doesn't drink a cup, doesn't check it. So then who cares if you saw the woman before you got engaged? You cannot dissolve the marriage. So Ihach has to buy again. Actually, this is Nami. Even before they got engaged, what does it help you find women? Ella must be Amrinan. You know why? If we saw the woman before they got engaged, we're going to say chazaka. You know why? If she had woman before they got engaged, and now he wants to say, look, let's dissolve the marriage, because we're going to say, you know what? He couldn't have known about those women. You know why? Because chazaka ain't adam five women. Generally, people speaking, major women, people don't accept, and therefore must be that even though the witnesses knew about it, he didn't. So if we're gonna cancel the chazaka that a person does not drink from a cup unless he checks it. If we know there were movement before Erisin, then we have to cancel that as well, even after the Erisin. That don't tell me that he must have checked it out. But no, canceling that, he would never have accepted it. Must be he never knew about it. So why do we need to bring proof that happened before the Erisin? Bring proof even after the Erisin. Use if she's still in the father's house, and use the principle kanim sekanhoya, and it was always there. Ella mission is arsa. Once he got engaged, once he got engaged, if you bring witnesses that are a woman after he got engaged, it's not good enough. Why? Because you have two chazakas. Chazaka the chazaka that says there's a cheskes aguf that says it happens late as possible. Knows it happened after the erisin, and too bad. And chazaka, if it would happen before, ain't other shaisa b'kay selim b'kay. There's a chazaka, and another chazaka is if he that definitely if the movement were there before, he would have checked it out, then he would have found out about it. So it must be, you have two bases to say that it happened after they got engaged, and therefore he's stuck. He has to give her a ksuv if he wants to divorce her. And he must have known about it, and he didn't care. Too bad. Mayam, what do you tell me? Chazaka ain't other movement. What do you tell me? No, but there's a chazaka again that says no. If he would have known about it before, he definitely would not have accepted it. So therefore, it cancels that out. And maybe it should dissolve the marriage. So you have two chazakas that say that everything, the marriage should continue. Either it happened very late, or he would have checked it out, knew about it, and he accepted it. You have another chazaka that says people generally don't accept movement, so therefore it's 1 against 2. Havi chodem makom tarti, it's 1 against 2. The chodem and makom tarti lo yamrin. So 1 against 2, we don't say. Rob explains. That is only if it happened, if the aim come along and say that they saw the woman after they got engaged. And that is why if they saw it after they got engaged, we continue with the marriage. And if he wants a divorce, he has to pay out a But what do you call it? But if we can bring proof that happened before he got engaged, then you can no longer say, oh, but there's a chazaka that says it happened later. But we have two witnesses that happened before. So that chazaka is out the window. All you're left now is one chazaka versus another. One chazaka is he knew about it and he must have accepted. The other chazaka is that people don't accept this kind of movement. 1 against 1. 1 against 1 will cancel each other out, and therefore the husband has the right to dissolve the marriage. A person is not drinking a cup unless he checks it out. Right? You want to say he must accept it. We have a chazaka, we have a chazaka that people generally don't accept these women. And therefore the husband keeps the money, retains the money. And that's the difference between the two. Just quickly finish. Rav Ashi comes with a third answer, and he says the difference between the ratio, why when she's in the father's house we believe the husband, and why when she's in the husband's house we believe her. Rav Ashi is very simple. While she's in the father's house, who ends up with the money from the Kesuvos? The father. It's all about her, and the father is ends of the money. So but the chazaka is about her. Her chazakas don't help the father at all, and that's why the onus of proof is on the father. But when she moves into the husband's house, she's no longer under her father. If there's a Kesuvos, it goes directly to her, and her chazaka is therefore help her. Totally different answer. Rav Ashi says, the Reisha is talking about where that if the money is who's claiming the Kesuvos? The father. The father in the Kesuvos, there's no chazaka there. The chazaka is to do with her, nothing to do with the father. Therefore, he has to prove that the husband owes money. That maybe the woman were there always and dissolve the marriage. The Sefer, the end is talking about money libiyotcha. The end is talking about she's saying, okay, now that I moved into your house, any Kesuvos money comes to me directly. I have a chet the group. The movement happened much later on. Therefore, the marriage was not a mistake, and you owe me your Kesuvos. So Gemara could just do that. Ask Rav Ashi a question. It says, even though in Al Mishnah, Rameh is the author of Al Mishnah, even though Rameh says that if he moved into the husband's house, the husband has to bring proof when the moment happened or whether the Kiddush should be dissolved. But what about those women that look like they've been there for a while, and probably they came with her from before, and they already had the woman? That the father has to bring a proof that no, that even though she's only living with the husband, the father has to prove that these women came later on, and therefore he should pay the ksubah. Once she moved into her husband's house, it's all about her. So l'chayda, she should be collecting the money. Therefore, the husband should be proving it, according to you. Because now, once you get married, or once you move to the husband's house, the money goes to her. And the money goes to her, Yudavashi said, then the husband has to bring a proof that he doesn't know where the money. So why does it say here, that if it's a mum that looks like it came from before, then the father has to prove it? Says the Gemara, we're talking about a mum, be a mum like an extra finger. And there's no cheskes gufe. What do you mean cheskes gufe? What? And the extra finger grew later on? Doesn't happen. And therefore, it must have happened from birth. Says the Gemara, Yeseres, my rai, my. So what are we telling the father? We're talking about extra finger. Bring a proof that it happened after they got engaged. Well, what kind of proof can you do that? Or bring a proof that that the Gemara says, I'll tell you, that doesn't mean bring a proof it happened after they got engaged. Maisi raya the rov and the bring a proof that the husband would have seen it. And he obviously, if he saw it and he still went ahead with the marriage, he accepted it, and therefore the husband has to pay out. Difficult to understand how he didn't notice that you had an extra finger, unless you always wore a glove every time they met. And even in the summer, and they had no suspicions, or they only met in the winter, and she wore a glove, so he never noticed, and so on. And nobody ever noticed either, because otherwise, we said before that usually people check. And so this is something that's so obvious, people, this deformity, they would have seen. So it must be somehow or another, he wasn't aware of it. Okay, we'll continue tomorrow, Mitzvah Hashem.